Welcome back to the Sports Marketeer. I'm your host, Amar Singh, and today I've got some really excellent guests for a conversation that I've been wanting to have for a while, actually. And I can't think of two better people in this industry who have the knowledge and the experience and the perspective to really help shine a light on some of these issues. We're talking today about flags, marches, far right politics, and actually how sport should respond. Should sport respond? Is it a problem for sport? We're going to get into that. So, welcome to the podcast, Sanjay Bhandari, MBE. Sanjay's chair of Kick It Out. He's also involved in Super League basketball and athletics as well. A very influential figure in the sector, a very experienced figure, and someone who's done some incredible work around inclusivity and driving representation across UK sport and business. And joining us is also Javan Odegah from Leaders in Sport. He's Programming and Impact Strategy Manager there. Javan builds and manages partnerships with leaders in sport and with companies and institutions in the sports sector, and has a real key focus on impact, particularly around inclusion, diversity, and equity. So, two brilliant experts. Sanjay, first of all, welcome.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks, Javan. Nice to meet you both online.
Lovely to have you. Lovely to have you on. And Javan, thanks for joining. Thanks for taking the time.
No, of course, pleasure. Big fan of the podcast, Omar, and the award-nominated podcast, should I say? And yeah, it's always important we can have spaces to have what I think is very timely and important conversations. So I'm looking to get straight into it.
Absolutely. We did start discussing this last week, didn't we, Jav? And I think hopefully now this conversation today is the fruition of that initial conversation we had. So, gentlemen, let me start by just setting the scene a little bit. The current state of affairs, both here and in other countries of relevance, such as the USA. We are seeing a rise in anti-immigration rhetoric. We are seeing the mainstreaming of far-right politics. There is nationalistic fervor. There's flags going up. That's not necessarily a problem always, but it is a symptom of some of the feeling. We saw a march in London called by far right, overtly far right figures with more than 100,000 people. That was a big wake up call for a lot of people, I think, and quite alarming. First of all, I mean, Sanj, you bring a lot of perspective to some of these conversations, I find. Do you think we're in a dangerous place right now than at any point in this century in terms of peace and equality?
But as the person with the most grey hair on this panel, I should say that this century is only 25 years old. And I say that because increasingly I feel like we're just, we're recycling 1981. There are some echoes going back. And so, yeah, of course, in terms of this century, in the last 25 years, the society feels more polarised than ever, more divided than in that time. But it's not necessarily the most divided time that I can remember, or the most polarized time that I can remember, or the most dangerous time that I can remember, because I was brought up in the 1970s and 80s. And the reason why I think 1980 was 2 years after Margaret Thatcher was elected. We had the miners' strike. We had race riots in Toxteth and Brixton and Handsworth. And we also had, I think that was the year where in the Liberal Party conference, David Steele said, go back to your constituencies and prepare for government. So 2 years into a new government, an insurgent party was of such popularity that they thought that they were going to be the governing party 2 or 3 years later. Now, of course, what happened was the Falklands War in 1982, and then, and the Liberals were broken up by the rise of the Social Democratic Party and so on. And there was a huge groundswell then that the Liberals and the SDP thought that they were going to win power, and it never happened, right? It never happened. That's why I say, I can see some echoes for things that have gone on in the past. Of course, look, there are undoubtedly some echoes when we see the sort of rise of the far right and some of the movements that we've seen. Is it the most dangerous time this century? Yes, but I do think we have seen some of this stuff in the past, and it nearly always coincides with moments of economic decline. And when people feel poorer, they look for people to blame, and they always look for outsiders to blame. So there are echoes of this in the past.
Javan, what do you think the factors are? I mean, Sanjay mentioned the economy and the historical reasons. From your perspective, what do you think are the factors around this divisive world that we feel we're living in right now?
there's a few ways to really speak to it. I think to your overarching point of, are we in a more dangerous point in this century? I feel definitely it's about, first it's asking people how do they feel. And I think when you start to understand that people feel, it's very much a clear indication to what the current state of play is. I think people are nervous, people are anxious, people are angry, and people are fed up, and the list goes on. And unfortunately, those are the words which come to mind immediately, as opposed to the more positive nature of how people can feel. Looking at society today, I feel you have a society which is, I don't feel the ideology or the narratives or the voices that we are seeing platformed. I think the way the world thinking, like how we're seeing it a lot more, has always been there. I feel we now have systems at play which essentially gives a certain rhetoric a platform now. And this platform means that a voice 20, 40 years ago, which is pretty much speaking to the same ideologies, fast forward to today, just had a far bigger audience to receive and almost digest what they're spewing out. And what you now find is people's online diet is becoming very much almost negatively impacted by this. And you have a very impressionable youth who, at a time now where they're far more outspoken or far more righteous in how they see the world and see their place in the world, are very much aligning themselves with things which immediately speaks to parts of them. So it's almost about masculinity, it's about identity, it's about race. And when you have things which are telling you that your identity is being attacked and is under threat, you're naturally going to align yourselves with something that you think is standing and supporting for what you support. And because we've seen so much being put out into the ether, people are literally finding themselves lost. And I think you find lost people tend to follow the first thing which shines a bit of light. And unfortunately, this light is disguised. And I feel you have a lot of people who are online trying to find or attach themselves to things which don't quite serve the purpose of what they think it is. So yeah, there's a lot happening out there, and I feel this generation now more than ever really needs to get a real hold on what we stand to represent in society, because it's very fractured, it's very divisive, and I think in those fractures weeds are sprouting and they're only growing without being trimmed or taken down accordingly.
Yeah.
Can I just pick up on that? Because I think this is the difference with 1981, right? Which is the social media and the way in which, which it can be a force for good, because it enables people to find their tribe, to find who they are. If you're a member of the LGBT community in a country where that's being gay is banned, then actually social media enables you to find people like you anywhere else in the world, and you can feel that sense of community. But of course, it also enables people to mobilize for more nefarious purposes. And this is one of the ironies of the rise of right-wing populism all around the world, right? It's a reaction to the establishment. They view themselves as an anti-establishment movement, and moving from a sort of globalized system to a much more localized system and local expressions of national pride. And yet it's one of the most effective global movements in the world, because they all use exactly the same methodologies, whether that's, Trump in the US, or whether that's Bolsonaro in Brazil, or whether that's Orban in Hungary, whether that's Narendra Modi in India, or whether that's what we're seeing with the rise of Farage here in the UK. The techniques that they're using are all exactly the same. And so this is the kind of irony, is that this sort of this move to decentralization, local, but more populist, certainly more right wing, but there's also, people on the right would say there's been a similar polarization on the left in what they would regard as the extremes of woke. But those movements are themselves global. And so that is a different factor, because people, you look at any event, any riot or any major protest, right, always has groups of people in it. And it will have some people that will have some legitimate grievance, who are there to air what they feel is their legitimate grievance. It will have some people who turn up, sort of on spec. They see something going on, want to join a crowd. It'll have some people who want to come to cause trouble because they like a fight and they want to come and cause trouble. And it'll have some people in the background who maybe aren't always necessarily turning up, but are stoking it. And actually, the way we perceive those, whether they're right-wing protests or left-wing protests, actually doesn't say quite so much about the protest. It says something about the way we see the world. Because what we tend to do is we'll tend to characterize the entirety of that group and the entirety of that protest or the entirety of that right, and we'll interpret it in the way that we see it by whichever one of those groups we want to focus on. So if you're in favor of that movement, then you'll say, well, you'll talk about the legitimate grievance. If you are anti them, you'll talk about the troublemakers, and you'll say, well, everyone's the same. And the reality is, and it's a bit like Javan just said about people are looking for identity and looking for an affiliation, and people maybe are feeling lost. These things provide a rallying call, a place where people can feel a sense of belonging.
Yeah, and I think the algorithm is keeping people entrenched in the tribe they see themselves in. It's keeping them entrenched in their views. I think these are really important. It's probably one of the defining issues of our time. Everything you're talking about is really resonating with me. I feel it's really important that we bring it to sport. Obviously, we work in sport, we work closely with sport, we're passionate about sport, and we, in our own ways, have all tried to utilize our experience and our passion in this subject. Sport has a big role in shaping cultural values, integrity. Sport is very high profile. Football is the national obsession. It really is. It's visceral. Fans, flags, chants, it all goes hand in hand with ideologies that can be good or bad. So, Sanjay, I'm talking to you as chair of Kick It Out. I know the great work that Kick It Out have done over the years. I've experienced it. Right now, I look at football and I have to say, I see a sport in paralysis a little bit on this subject. I feel like football doesn't really know what to do or what to say. Would that be fair?
I'm not sure it is fair, actually, because I think if you again, my memory's maybe a bit longer, so I go back to watching football in the 70s and 80s and going to matches, and football was actively used as a recruiting ground for the National Front. They would be selling the Bulldog magazine outside grounds, right? And it was used as a way of recruiting football. Now, through the work of police, clubs, the Football Supporters Association, that's largely gone away from football, right? So if football or sport and our crowds are starting to be used as recruiting grounds for extremism, then I think it's quite right that football and sport should specifically address those issues. Where if there isn't evidence of that, then what should football and sport do? I think football and sport should focus on understanding that a lot of people were starting to feel less welcome and less included. I was due to go to London on the day of the protest with my wife, and my wife's mixed dual heritage, half Sri Lankan, and I can't pass, right? There's I'm more nervous than she is, and also I'm a bloke, and so I kind of go, let's go to Leeds instead and do something else. So I'm making a decision. It's affecting a decision that I'm making. So I completely understand it, right? But I want to feel more welcomed, and I want other people to feel like they're more welcome. So I think the role and responsibility of football and sport is to double down on the stuff that they have been doing, which is this is a place where you are all feeling welcome. And by the way, if we see any more incidents of discrimination, we're going to come down hard on them. We've already seen. Actually, we've seen 3 games abandoned already in pre-season this season: Salford, York, Tividale, and another game recently as well. So
there has been progress, I think, and you've been really involved in that. And I didn't want to take away from that because there's more reporting, and I think that shows the app that you guys have, the mechanisms, but also the voices are important as well, Jav. I mean, when we look back to the pandemic and George Floyd and coming out of that, and footballers were taking the knee, that felt like a really powerful moment at the time. Do we feel, what happened with taking the knee? I'd love to know your thoughts on it, both of you. Was it a gesture that lost its purpose and meaning? Did it become performative in the views of people? Or is it more about, like Sanj says, what's actually going on to actually eradicate racism from football or remove racism from football? Is that more important now than the gestures and the voices?
Yeah, I think there's 2 ways to speak to that. Definitely want to come to the kind of Black Lives Matter piece, which obviously was birthed off the back of the murder of George Floyd. But looking at the role of sport has to really like show up and be seen in these moments, taking more of a holistic viewpoint. What we're looking at is systems at play, because what the issues we're speaking to are systemic. They have root causes which then permeates and finds themselves across the branches of that it touches. Looking at sport, I feel sport should also be acknowledged for it can be tired. in the sense of like it's constantly being asked to do something at a pace of change that it itself is strong to keep up. And the sports within sport, your footballs, your rugbies, your cricket, your tennis, your athletics, they are sometimes dealing with their own ecosystems and the issues within them to manage. And I think all these different bodies and different teams and leagues within these different sports will let you know that we have enough stuff going on in our own houses before we can start looking at how we tackle and speak to wider society issues. And the reason I flagged that is because are we asking sport to do things that it's quite not equipped to speak to at this point? And what I mean by that now is sport in essence of how it shows up for conversations today. I think sport is still perhaps 10 or 15 years behind in terms of how it needs to show up and be seen. And when you find yourselves perhaps not being fit for purpose to deal with some of these very complex issues, you unfortunately go against the fence. You unfortunately shy away. You unfortunately spend so much time trying to figure it out. You don't realize that by the time the window's passed, you almost stood still the whole time. So my thing is, how are we really looking at equipping sport to deal with these issues? Are we looking at the roles of sport being needed to have individuals in roles and positions who are 24/7 thinking about these kind of things? Because if you're asking someone whose job as a leader in an organization, who is to run a football club, to run a tennis team, to look at dealing with that as a main fundamentals, to now quickly switch the script and say, oh, what do you think about the march that happened on the weekend? It is a bit of it's two different kettle of fishes. And when they misspeak to it, when they perhaps don't have the right words to formulate to address it, they're attacked for it immediately. And we know council culture is rife. So that paralysis that you speak to, I think it's in people's minds. And I don't think people are shying away from it per se, but I think people are afraid to say the wrong thing. And in doing that, you create this kind of frozen state where everyone's like, are you going to do it? Are you going to do it? Or we'll wait for you to set the tone, then we can follow behind you. So yeah, and to the George Floyd piece, from speaking with lots of individuals who, I guess, what we're seeing is essentially the players, right? Because all the strategy, all the conversations happen in closed doors, but essentially what the world sees is the players taking the knees. So we now need to ask, what did the players feel that was doing for them? And I think a lot of them felt that it was virtue signaling. It was essentially them before a match taking a knee, one that shined a positive light on kind of a joint commitment to trying to squeeze something out of society. But beyond that, I think the question was always what happens next. And I don't think there was enough action, enough strategy, enough mobilization to give the players the confidence to realize that this is the reason why you're doing this. And this is the reason why you continue to do this will have an impact that is felt here, or here. It was kind of a knee-jerk reaction that kind of allowed them to realize I'll be a bit of a prop here that's basically been used and planted to make the other powers that be look good and make them feel that they're doing the right thing. Because as soon as I finish this 90 minutes, I then walk back and see people from my background and my community still facing the same issues. I still walk and perhaps feel treated the same way I felt treated off the pitch and was on the pitch. So yeah, I think those are the kind of things which perhaps saw those kind of elements of gestures slowly peter out post the pandemic.
I'll pick up on the George Floyd and taking a knee a second, but just going back a step, I think the question that prompted this for you, Emma, is in a way is a sort of subset of the probably the question I've been asked most frequently over the last 6 years, right? And it's almost become trite. I get tired of being asked it, is this a football problem or is it a society problem, right? And I nearly always get asked this on a sort of slightly right-leaning talk show, right? And so my first observation is, well, if you're right-leaning, your hero is probably Margaret Thatcher. And you do remember that she said there was no such thing as society. But if there, I don't agree with that. I believe there is such a thing as society. But if there is such a thing as society, what is it? What is it? It's just a construct, isn't it? It's made up of individuals and institutions and industries. That's society. So society changes, and it changes by the actions of individuals, institutions, and industries. But guess what? Football, like everything else, is an institution. It's an industry. It's made up of individuals and institutions. And so it's not a question of is this football or is this society or is this sport or is this society? It's one and the same. We're part of society. So, of course, it's both football and its society. So we as football and we as sport have to take our responsibility when it crosses our path. So if we see discrimination in our grounds, in our clubs, what are we doing about that? What are our values? What do we stand for? That's why I say, actually, when outside events touch us, it's much more about, really, we have to double down right now. I think what sport and football needs to double down on is, this is a welcoming space for everyone. We want, our new strategy at Kick It Out is Football United. We want everyone to be thinking about how we tackle discrimination together, but much more importantly, how we make football a game where everyone feels that they're welcome and that they belong, right? So I think it is about doubling down on the values. But of course, the great thing about football and the great thing about sport is we become a lightning rod for all of this stuff, because it's kind of the real world on steroids, right? It's like people feel this emotion so deeply and it engages people in a way that nothing else does. But with that comes tremendous power. And so we have a greater power to be able to influence social change. It's not maybe not quite as powerful as we always think we are. We're not as powerful as social media, but we have this incredible power. I think then when you come to things like taking a knee, which is an expression of that power, if you're a player, the biggest power you have is your platform, that you're on a match day, the eyes of the world are on you. So that is your power. I think the challenge with taking a knee is exactly the same as I think Kick It Out have had in the past with the T-shirts, right? Which is every protest movement or every awareness campaign has a natural shelf life. And I think this is because, it's these things, they start off, and taking a knee in particular started off as a protest driven by the players. The decision to do this was the club captains. And it was people like, Troy Deeney and so on, who were Wes Morgan, who were influential in those dressing rooms, and it was in that captain's meeting, and they were, and it was the club captains in the Premier League who said, "This is what we want to do." And in a way, that strength is also its weakness, because it's ground up, but then what happens is it starts getting baked into the corporate ritual, and then eventually it becomes sort of wallpaper. It's just, I don't notice it. Are we still doing that? Are we doing that before every game? Why are we doing that? And I think part of the challenge with all of these things is it's a symbolic gesture. The point is, what is it you want at the end of that, right? Because when things like Kick It Out started, this was an awareness raising campaign, because people wouldn't necessarily be able to identify what racism is or isn't, and therefore then what they should do about it. I don't think there's any doubt about that now. Most people know that. They may not understand sexism and misogyny. They may not understand homophobia. And so there you need to be raising awareness. So I think if you're going to do some kind of campaign and protest around tackling racism or anything else, have a beginning, middle and end, and say what it is you want at the end of it. And I think that challenge was you didn't bake in. Where does this end? What do we want from this? And so it's certainly some of the bit of advice I've been giving, the FA, and if the women players want to do something different, is have an objective with it. Because if it's to say we want the end of racism in its current form has probably existed for 400 years. You might be taking the knee for quite a long time, right? But if you can say, actually, we're going to do this for 2 years, and the 3 things we want at the end of this, it might be linked to the Online Safety Act. It might be, I want these kind of tools made available, and we're going to carry on doing this until the social media companies listen, and we've got tools to protect us that are effective, that mean I don't have to get exposed to this. Things that people can rally behind and you can measure and say, at the end of it, we'll have achieved something. And I think that's the challenge with all protests is, how are you going to measure whether you've been effective? And so then it becomes very easy for opponents of it to focus on the gesture and go, well, that was a failure, wasn't it? And then the players then feel, why did we do this? So you can see the sense of frustration of the players. And that's the bit of overarching strategy that to me is missing, is how are we going to measure the success of this? And then once we've done that, we'll move on to something else, and we'll make the progress on the next step, and we'll make the next protest, and we want this next thing delivered.
Yeah, I fully agree. Because I was going to say, Amar, before we move on, is like there wasn't enough tangible elements built into why we were doing this. Because Sanjay's point is, we could be taking the knee for a very, very long time, and then it's like, all right, do we start taking 2 knees now? What was the kind of next step that we were working towards? And alongside that, I felt that there wasn't enough commentary around why we're doing it. Of course, what birthed the cause of it was very much vivid and the whole world was made to see it. But I feel like in the action of us taking the knee, I don't think there was enough being said around this is the cause of it. This is where we stand with it currently, and this is how we move forward with it. And to Sanjay's point, that strategy was really lacking. And behind it, again, there wasn't that kind of goal we're working towards to achieve, to say that once this is done, we now know this comes into practice, because we know, and it repeats itself. There will be another thing which sparks another outrage that then leads to a knee-jerk reaction of symbolism, and then something will take over for the next couple of weeks, and then we'll kind of like dust our hands of it. We've dealt with that now. But if we don't have things which keeps us almost match fit to deal with these things ready-made, then it's always going to seem like flash in the pan activities which are only being done to almost appease someone in that moment of time, as opposed to it being something that actually educates and builds and sustains something that we can actually move forward with. So yeah, that's what I stand on that point.
It always comes down to KPIs, objectives,
metrics.
90% of my conversations at work usually come down to those. Nevertheless, if we're talking about making sure that there are objectives, there are goals to hit, and it's not just performative, we have to first be satisfied that the institutions around us are committed to driving equity, driving equality. If we look at sport around us today and we see a less vocal football at the moment, I think it's fair to say, although to Sanjay's point, there's some very good work, measurable progress that has been made off the pitch, and on the pitch and in the crowds in recent years. And we look at, say, the World Cup, for example, right, where the last FIFA World Cup took place in Qatar, which was not somewhere that was welcoming to the LGBTQ community. The next one is going to be taking place in the USA, where immigration is going to be a hot topic, and everything that comes with Trump show. Do we feel that sport is actually serious about this, Sanj?
Yeah, look, I think it's that confluence of sport and international politics, right? And it's very hard, because people say sport and politics shouldn't mix, but the problem is that all international sport is is people standing behind national anthems and national flags and then competing against each other to beat each other. I mean, it's just war by proxy, right? Yeah. So I mean, it's like saying take the politics out of sport is a bit like saying, yeah, I'm going to take the egg out of the cake. I mean, I'm not sure you can. It's like intrinsically political.
I mean, you might not be able to take the politics out of sport, but you can be intentional about not aligning yourself with regimes, dictators, nefarious states.
Of course, at the time at which the World Cup was awarded to the USA, probably nobody anticipated we were going to be where we are, and not just about immigration also, but don't get the rollback of women's rights and women's control over their own bodies has been rolled back in the US. Can or do the international authorities do about that? I suppose there's a difference between does football care and does FIFA care, because those are two different things. FIFA is a deeply political beast, and so does FIFA care? I think probably not. I don't have any evidence that it cares particularly about some of this stuff. Obviously, they've just started doing some stuff with their sort of anti-racism task force, but then at the same time, during the Club World Cup, a lot of the anti-racism messaging was just quietly deleted because they're being hosted in the US and they don't want to be perceived to be annoying their hosts. And so I think these challenges are we're going to continue to have them. I think that's different to how I feel about, the remit of things like Kick It Out. We focus in really only on English football, and I would say what you have is people with great intentions and actually the ambitions are in the right place, but there's the competencies uneven, as I suppose you kind of expect across 92 clubs and 50 county football associations all around the country. So I think people want to do the right things, but they don't always know exactly what good looks like or how to get good done, particularly when they're operating in a really highly scrutinized environment that every mistake, it's not like operating a corporate where if you make a mistake, no one notices. You make a mistake in football and everyone is all over you and condemning you. And so it's a hard environment in which to drive change. So I think my short answer is, yeah, I'm not sure FIFA do care, but I think, speaking with the constituents we work with English football, I think they care, but some things they do well and some things they don't do so well, and it's how we can get them to a place where everyone's doing a little bit better.
Jeff?
Yeah, really good response, Sanjay. I think you kind of spoke to the point I'd like to make now, Sanjay, earlier on when you said that society is basically a makeup of institutions and industries. And within these institutions and industries, you have people, individuals. And what you now find is that these individuals will have their various agendas, affiliations, will be in the hands of certain individuals to almost for their own greater good. And what I'm alluding to now is we need to look at the leaders within certain positions and let's have it right. Individuals in certain positions are not creating their own kind of like purpose of power, like they're voted in, that they're given their tenures and their reigns because they are supported and people are behind them. I really think at that point, we really need to look at how we're really addressing and putting individuals who are in positions of power to fall into power. The similar way how we have like owners screening for the Premier League before anyone can assume ownership of a Premier League football club. There's a level of vetting that they need to go into. I kind of feel at these huge bodies who have so much influence, there needs to be a level of screening that almost ties into factors which relates to you need to realize that before you can almost politicize or align with any particular awareness piece that your organization represents, there's a basic level of understanding of like, do you know the needs of society? Do you know what we stand for? Do you know what we represent? To your point, Sanjay, when we saw the Club World Cup show up in the US and the very much switch on, switch off nature to which we saw branding and messaging around diversity and inclusion removed across forever stadiums, what that basically said to me is that you're basically saying that today I don't really matter, but the next tournament, hey, you matter again. Well, here, you don't matter as much anymore, because we have to almost reflect and support the people that be. So if you're someone who can be in the hand of someone to that degree, are you really the best leader to really be moving forward what is a huge, huge piece, which is global football? So yeah, there's so many ways to look at it, but I think next summer is going to be massive. You have probably the biggest sporting tournament taking itself to the US, which obviously gets mentioned a lot, but let's not forget it's also a World Cup which will be taking place in Mexico and Canada as well. I'd love to think that they too are also being seen as, because no doubt there's going to be a lot of messaging in around the World Cup, and the US are going to have a real stranglehold on what that message or narrative is. So I really think there is an opportunity for Mexico and Canada to really align and really speak to what I think they're up against, which is something which is far more sinister and coming from a place which doesn't really have the words diversity, equity, and inclusion in its ingredients.
Yeah. I'm going to move back to social media. It has lurched to the right. In some cases, some of these guys running these platforms, these tech billionaires, are under a bit of duress, I think. They're bending the knee to Trump and that agenda. But then you've got Elon Musk, who is overtly platforming far-right ideologies, far-right groups on X. I know a lot of brands have come off X, over the last 3 years. It's a messy place right now, and there's a lot of divisive content on there. Should rights holders in sport be on X if they are also saying that they value diversity and equality? What do you think, Sanj?
So I'll get all the hard ones first.
I think your ears on me give you that kind of.
So I would say, should I extend it beyond the rights holders to our brand partners as well, right? Because I think, particularly with social media, you remember the boycott, and I was kind of probably slow on that boycott in terms of to be persuaded, because we don't remember the time. I think sort of Birmingham or Glasgow Rangers, they might have come off, but they hadn't told anyone they were coming off. And I thought, well, what's the point of that? That's why you got to get other people in. And so what my focus on was, right, if we're going to do this, we've got to tell everyone we're going to do it, and we've got to get our everyone in football, but we've got to get Sky and TNT, and we've got to get the Adidas and Nike, and you got to get the brands, and everyone did, and they all did it, right? Actually, in other sports did it, and it was. I was
at Budweiser at the time. We did the same thing as well.
I think we probably spoke at the time.
Yeah.
So then it becomes a moment, and you can think, well, if we need to, can it become a movement from that moment, and there may be other reasons why that hasn't happened or needed to happen. Now with X, we're in a slightly different position because obviously it's lurched completely in one direction. I think so. I think you have to, if people are doing it, it has to be everyone kind of doing it in a concerted way, because we are David in that David and Goliath battle now. Sporties used to be the big guy in the room, and we're used to bullying everyone else around, but we're not. When Facebook has 3 billion users, we're nothing. 4,000 professional footballers here is nothing. Do they care? Doesn't matter. But if we did it,
and they're not putting paid budget behind their posts either, so it's really not that important in terms of ultimately how these platforms make their money, right?
They don't care. So it really, again, it comes down to strategy and KPIs. If you're going to do this, why are you doing it? Right? If you're going to come off, why are you coming off? Because people are staying on because they want to connect. And what you are seeing is rights holders that change in the way in which they interact on X. It's much less conversational. It's much more, I'm using this to broadcast stuff, turning off comments, and they're not really looking at it, but they are trying to shift their audience more to other platforms. And whilst they feel they have to be on X because that's where their current audience is, they're trying to migrate their audiences over onto other platforms. And I think that seems to be the most common strategy that I've seen that rights holders are doing. I think if you are going to decide you're going to take your content off, you've probably got to go along with all the other brands, and you've got to go along with everyone else. And they may reach a tipping point where actually just the platform becomes so, it's just, you've got to let commerce take its course. It becomes so pointless being on there because you're not reaching the people you want to reach, that actually people prioritize other platforms because they've got the reach with where they want it. But that may take a little time. So should they? Yeah, probably as a point of principle, we probably all should be off. I'm off, but that's mainly because I also think it's probably good for my mental health that I'm off X. Will they be off? I doubt it. I doubt it, because I think they're all probably quite sensibly for them taking the strategy that they want to migrate their audience elsewhere.
Javan, would you agree?
Yeah, it's definitely a complex one. The best way I can give you the analogy is it's almost like it's a house move that takes like a year, where you've got the keys, but the house is by no means in a fit state for you to move into, and you're constantly being given a pushback date before you can actually fully move in and make it a home. And what I mean by that is there's so many layers to it. So through my conversations that I've had with a number of rights holders, their relationships with platforms such as X and Facebook and so forth isn't a kind of strictly fruitful one. There are loads of complications when it comes down to data and managing it. Essentially, a lot of these rights holders would rather manage these things in-house, because the more they're across and own their data, then the more they can actually use it for their own benefit. So that medium or middle person in between, which are these platforms, actually do make their lives a lot harder. So if they can find a means to make it a lot easier, I think they'd rather jump ship a lot sooner. But the issue you have now is that when you look at the shift or the seismic task it would take to move what will be millions of followers on one platform, and then now tell them to, hey, we're going to show up and be here, it will take some time. And we very much work in an era where it's all about the rules of engagement, and the rules of engagement are what partners and brands naturally tie themselves into. You give us access to these amount of followers, these eyeballs, these engagements, we'll get behind you. Brand deals, partnerships, sponsored ads, you name it. So when you see the spend of the brands and the kind of broadcasters start to shift, I think that's where you see the clubs then can realize, all right, let's speed up this move we make now, because the individuals who essentially give us our resource or our power to kind of be able to do what we want to do, they're now backing us. So to that extent, I think you're going to find a big step, for instance, now is the Premier League, now moving to Olympia, and now starting to manage a bit of production in-house. They now can start to almost equip themselves to move at a pace and in a direction which isn't so dependent on a third party. And what you now find a lot of the time, I think in the US, it's a growing model where loads of leagues and teams are building their own in-house studios, productions. So it gets to a point where these clubs are becoming more than just clubs. They're becoming their own kind of organizations and entities. And again, it is the pace of change, as always, is what we're going to question and call out. But I think eventually you're going to realize that clubs are going to realize the individuals who are still on these platforms aren't really the fans or the people we want to engage with, or who we see who represent what we stand for. So albeit the change, I think, is happening and shifting in certain areas, I think the pace of it needs to be aided by, I think, the ecosystem of sports business getting on side, so we can speed up and get to a place where we don't find platforms which are just spewing out narratives which I guess are no good for society as a whole.
I think that's absolutely spot on. And I think it's such an important point to make that if a club is too reliant, take a football club, for example, too reliant on their social media followers, well, they're not getting any real data on them. They're not really able to target them effectively and speak to them and communicate with them effectively. And they should be actually thinking about, as you say, building their own publishing ecosystems. And a lot of them are doing a good job of it, and a lot of them are way behind, right?
Yeah, and to that point as well, I think as ever, the proof is in what can be shown. I feel until you see a lot more case studies and research pieces that go to market, which demonstrate how one club has taken that leap of faith and can really speak to tangible benefits of what have been realized, that's when you start seeing now, okay, the industry starts to get on board. You have a lot more agencies whose jobs are going to be around how we help businesses and right so to shift from here to here. So I feel like once we get a bit more early adopters, I think then you'll find they can actually speak to what the realization points are, what were some of the misgivings, what are the learnings, and once those are out there for in the public domain of the industry, you then find that we get a lot more people's attentions.
Yeah. Jav, I'm going to stay with you, partly because I don't want to be accused of giving Sanj the tough question first, but also because I know that the organizations you're speaking to and a lot of the people you're speaking to on the HR side through your work with leaders in sport, which is excellent. I want to ask a little bit about employee well-being.
Yeah.
I had a colleague who came up to me yesterday actually and said, I just wanted to say, I hope you and your family are all feeling okay, feeling positive about everything with everything that's going on. I just want you to know that you have my support. And I was quite touched by it, actually. I said that, thank you for saying that. I really appreciate that. And I guess that can be very powerful. As Sanj mentioned earlier, for some of us, we do feel like we are having to tell our loved ones and family members to avoid certain areas because we're literally worried about their safety. And that feels quite alarming if you really think about it, right? In terms of the mental health of employees, we have diverse teams working in sport now. You work with organizations, you both help them on becoming more diverse in terms of their hiring practices. What's your advice to those organizations, those professionals in terms of leaders and people who are working with diverse groups? Should they be speaking to them about this right now? Should they have an open door policy on this? Is this something they need to be addressing, Jav?
Firstly, yes. I think you need to be addressing the wider areas of challenging issues which impact day-to-day living, although it may not be directly reflected in the walls of your business or organization. I think we live in a time now where, if you look at the working world, we're all taking this call from home. So you tend to find that the mediums to which people are consuming things are shifting, and people are left to their own devices a lot more frequently in terms of I'm at home as such, I'm not really in the working environment. That the touch points to which a business has or your organization has to hopefully shape, support, and give an environment which is healthy has been reduced because you're in the office maybe twice, once or three times a week max. So I think organizations need to realize that yes, there's a balance of like you don't want to veering and almost like overwhelm someone with kind of like almost give them a victim status of saying, I know something's happening with you. Are you okay? We want to check in. Because that also can be quite fatiguing, quite tiring of almost assuming that I or we are always being seen as the issue or the ones who are kind of like being oppressed as such. I think businesses really need to lean in and really understand, all right, how can we show up for you, although it's not always in the physical? So it's like, are we creating time in the weekly business schedule that just gives us kind of like a weekly check-in to join a call, to speak to various areas of like non-work related activities where we can actually speak to the areas to which actually impact us. I think we need to realize that in any business or organization, the most important asset is your people. So how people show up to work, how people feel at work, that is going to very much be aligned to how they do their job, and how they do the job directly impacts the performance of your business. So I thought that businesses really need to be mindful of like, we need to really dial up that emotional intelligence around how people are moving and feeling, and really make sure that where we stand is very clear. I think businesses sometimes, as we spoke about with organizations, such as how certain sporting parts have gone quiet or freeze, businesses sometimes need to realize that because you're obviously not going to be with something, but because you don't make it very known what you are with, you do leave this kind of like gray area where the individuals who are directly or indirectly impacted kind of feel a bit lost. They kind of feel a bit like, do I feel seen? Do I feel heard? Do you actually know how I feel right now? And unless you actually lead in to actually understand that, because you can't relate to it directly. But unless you actually speak to those individuals who are impacted, you're not really going to understand how you need to move. Because you may assume that, oh, you come in smiling, you come fine, banter's flying, the jokes are there, we're kind of having the same usual kind of like conversations that we do. But as soon as I leave that office, as soon as I leave or jump on the tube, my mind goes straight away to that first thing I scroll by, or I read, or I hear, or I see pop up in a group chat. So I think the organization should realize that it really has a raw duty to step in and really have almost like a safeguarding procedure to make sure that before I think about you as a profession or as a job title, let me make sure that the person, Javan Odegah, is okay. And once I know that's kind of good, hey, let's get straight back into our meeting now.
Yeah. I'll just pick up on that, because the other sort of another part to this, another angle to this is about, you know, that broader polarization in society, and things like the protest will embolden people to maybe say things that they wouldn't otherwise have said, and maybe things that they have felt and thought, but felt that it wasn't acceptable for them to say, might now feel that it's acceptable for them to say, but perhaps even in a work setting. And so some of that polarity that we see out in more broader society that's happening on the streets, we saw it with things like social media, if people feel that it's okay to use the N-word or the P-word on social media, well, we'll see that arise in grassroots football. If we see it in the timeline, you've got to expect it on the touchline. Right. Well, now actually workplaces might need to think about, are they now going to be expecting some of the sort of language and conflict that we're seeing out in more broader society sort of coming into the workplace? So there is a number of different angles, and what are your values, and how do you deal with people that might have different opinions, and what's acceptable behaviour in the workplace, right? I think that's going to be a challenge now as well for people, because we're going to start seeing people feel more emboldened to have these conversations. It's not that, you know, of course it's really important people have freedom of speech, but it's also about there's a time and place for things. And, you know, when I come to work, I'm here to do my work, whatever my job is, right? And other people have got that same thing. Here we're a team, and it's what works. How is that going to help your team dynamics in the office or wherever it is you happen to work?
Two really great perspectives. Thank you. I think the message is clear across both of those perspectives, which is, you know, workplaces, organizations have to be attuned to everything that's going on and cannot bury their heads in the sand. Leadership plays a really important role at a time like this, being cognizant of the good and the bad that can come from a change in the political climate is really important. As we were recording this, I saw a headline flash up that YouGov did a poll that said 30% of the public would vote for reform in the next election, and Farage is being tipped for Downing Street, and that's obviously not a particularly positive prospect for some of us. What I wanted to do, though, is actually ask you guys for a note of positivity, a reason for hope. We work with people. I think we're passionate about sport, and presumably that passion comes from the good that we've seen, the power that we see in sport to do good. I'd love to just get your reasons for believing, your reasons for hope. Sanjay, I'll ask you first.
It's a long time to go to the next general election. Lord knows what's going to happen between now and then. Like I said to you, 1981, the Liberals thought that they were going to be the next government. It didn't happen. I'm not saying it won't happen now for the Reform Party. We're just saying it's a long time. Lord knows what will happen. What I would say is that in sport and in football, I see a game that's completely different to 30, 40 years ago. We had our launch party recently and for our new strategy at Kick It Out. And Gary Neville was kind enough to join us and talk about, when we had the sports minister do a video for us, first of all to support us, and then we had Gary Neville and this amazing panel of young people and Mikhail Sylvester at the end. But, you know, Gary Neville talking very, very passionately about what happened with the Antoine Semenyo incident, very passionately about what happened to one of his players at Salford City. And you think, you know, shouldn't we be doing better? Oh, can't we be better here in 2025? And I sort of talked to someone afterwards saying, did you not notice the massive difference? Well, see, when I was a kid, when I was watching football, and people didn't call that stuff out. And when it did get called out, the expectation was that on me as a brown person, or Jav as a black person, or you, Amar, as a brown person, it's up to us. We do it. No one else is going to help us. I didn't have to say that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Gary Neville said it. He's a very powerful, influential, middle-aged, you probably wouldn't like me saying that, white man, really influential in our industry. That's like massive progress. These are the advocates and allies that we've got. The pressure isn't always on us. We have far more friends than we think we have. And I think there is an enormous silent minority. Just look at people. Look at people, right? We're focusing on the 150,000 people around Leicester Square. What about the other 69,850,000 people who live in this country and all of those thousands of interactions every single day? We're a country that, in my mind, is we like to rub along with each other tolerantly, live and let live. You know, kind of one of the things I love about Britain, about being British, is we're kind of apathetic. It's like I can't be asked is the kind of phrase that could only be a rallying call in Britain, right? It's like I can't bother with that, right? Like I just want to get on with my own life and let you get on with your life, right? When I walk around the streets, that's what I see, right? When I walk to a football match, that's what I see. I've been going to on the 92. I've been to Rotherham. I've been to Hull this season. I'm going to Grimsby in a few weeks' time. Even in those places where you think, well, I might be the only non-white face. I have fantastic conversations with other football fans. We're just there for the same reason. That's the majority of my experience, right? This thing that happened over here one day, it's marching season. It happens every August. Like the rain comes and it all goes away. That is part of real world. But there's a much more bigger part of it, which is just all of us rubbing along with each other and getting along with each other.
Yeah, very nicely put. So Sanjay's gone for Gary Neville, British apathy, and the reasonable silent majority of people that he encounters when he goes to football matches all over the country. Jav, how about yourself? Your reason for hope?
There's a few, which I think is the positive in itself. Probably focusing on two. I think one is the emboldened nature of conversations like this. I'm positive of the Amars, the Sanjays that are in our industry and who both started at a particular point where you both could have grown tired. You both could have very much become insular and realized that, you know what, the main thing for me now is family and immediate friends. What's happening elsewhere, I can't be asked, as Sanjay said, but we're here having this conversation. Amar, you have a platform. Sanjay, you have a voice. I've known the name for a long time, Sanjay, but I've been really, really privileged just to hear you speak the way you have. So we can't plant a whole field of you and see you pop up, but we can therefore give you platforms to speak and to make us kind of realize where we stand and how we move forward. Another reason of positivity from an industry standpoint, I think we're at a point now where fail to plan, prepare to fail, obviously very much a saying we're all familiar with, but the reason why I think I'm really, really confident around where we're at with our planning now is if we look at the governing bodies across sport in this country, the ECB, the RFU, the FA, LTA and so forth. Obviously from working pretty closely with myself, I have a kind of a real inside piece on knowing that the strategies which they have out, which are very much speaking to the areas of diversity, equity and inclusion, are very much at a kind of like maturity point in terms of their initial 3 or 5 year strategies. The positivity isn't perhaps to say where we're at, but we now have a very much clear indication backed by data, backed by informed strategy to now realize where we truly are at. I think in years gone by, strategies were put in place of an idea of where we should be, or almost put together almost to stoke the fire, to say that we've got a strategy out there, it's for 5 years, go have a look at it. It's a nice glossy deck, PDF, it's in your inbox, read it and you're sweet. But now I think you now find that we're in a position now where these strategies are really coming out to really produce tangible insights to say, all right, you now have the data and the numbers which clearly indicate where we are performing against various metrics. We're either doing well or not doing so well. So we now have data to inform action, where I think before we had too much theory and too much ideas that people went into, not realizing how do we actually achieve what we're trying to set out to achieve. And that makes me now realize that the next strategies, which are going live, kick-outs, literally a few weeks ago, are now positioning themselves to take us to the next stage of this journey. A lot of my work now is very much speaking about this space of inclusion and impact to really move the conversation beyond it just being positioned as a moral good. I think we now need to position it, and I do see it, that it's now becoming positioned as a business imperative. So we're now seeing how organizations are realizing that if you want to be an organization that can thrive tomorrow, you need to realize that diversity of thought, representation is going to be your key USP in any business. It allows you to show up in different markets and appeal to different diverse consumer bases. It supports the development of your product or your services, and it means that people can have a certain identity to affiliate themselves with your brand. So I think we really realize that how it's now becoming a conversation around there's a level where revenue can meet impact. I think that's where we can find that this force, this movement we have has a lot more momentum, and anything that comes its way that's trying to trip it up, put a bit of oil on the floor to make it slip, we keep going, because this machine we have is foolproof. So yeah, Rome wasn't built in a day, but I feel that we're definitely building the foundation for a solid piece of architecture.
Brilliant. And the data does show us that Gen Z, today's consumer, tomorrow's consumer, more purpose-driven than ever before. And to your point, Jav, the business argument is becoming so imperative,
Yes.
that it does give us a lot of hope. Gentlemen, thank you so much. This was a brilliant conversation. I could continue talking to you for hours because I learned so much from both of you. But yeah, a massive thank you from me. And I look forward to catching up with you both next week at Leaders in Sport.